Seriously, rigging out the Blackmagic Pocket 6K has literally cost me sleepless nights as well as headaches. Weeks of ordering parts, sending them back, ordering new ones, and going back and forth. But now, after 2 weeks, I finally found my perfect solution for rigging out the Pocket 6K for shooting handheld. My name is Damien Cooper, and welcome to Monkey Pixel.
We've got some fresh new young talent doing some things that I know you haven't heard before.
1, 2, 3, listen.
So when buying the Pocket 6K, I already knew that it needed some kind of rigging. But what I didn't really anticipate is that it was always these little details that literally drove me nuts. When it comes to shooting with my camera, I can be somewhat of a diva because I want everything to be as optimized as possible and I want everything to be nearly as perfect as it can be. I'm shooting a ton. I'm shooting for YouTube, I'm uploading 3 times a week, but we're also doing commercial work on the side. So when using this camera, I really want it to feel good in my hands and I want to have all the features that make shooting with this camera much easier. So in this video I will go over all the parts that I use to create my perfect rig, and this can obviously vary from person to person, but I will also go over some other kind of rigs, from really small and simplistic to bigger V-mount battery styles, and I will also tell you why I didn't like some of them and what I liked about others. But before we get into details of what kind of parts I used and how I actually rigged it out, let me tell you what I was actually looking for when starting the whole project. So first of all, I wanted to keep it as simple as possible. Like I've already said, I'm shooting a lot and I'm also doing a lot of handheld run and gunning, so really having a big 15mm rod setup or even a shoulder rig setup just wasn't for me. So I wanted to keep it as compact and simple as possible. But then on the other hand, I didn't really want to make any compromises when it came to shooting with the camera. Neither the handling nor the battery life, the storage, or other small things. So here were the main reasons that I wanted to have in a Pocket 4K/6K camera rig. Number one was obviously battery life. I didn't really want to worry about the camera dying on me every 20 minutes. And although I'm not really shooting any long-term content, I'm not shooting weddings or any other big events that I need to run the camera for hours on hours. And even if the camera shuts down on me, it's usually a shot that I can reproduce easily. But then again, it still started to stress me out. And one thing I didn't really like about using the original Canon batteries was that you really had to charge a dozen of batteries after every shoot. And as I've already said, I'm shooting a lot, so that became a tedious process. Number 2 was storage. When shooting with a Pocket 6K, it obviously produces rather large file sizes, and I didn't really want to have to worry about this either, so this was one thing that was rather important to me. And number 3, as I've already mentioned a couple of times, is I like to shoot handheld. So the camera needs to feel good in my hand, and I need to look forward to shooting instead of dreading it, because the ergonomics of the camera aren't good enough, or that the camera is just too big and heavy for longer shoots. Number 4 is I needed an external monitor, because I can't really deal with the display that comes with the camera. Although it's pretty good, it's not articulating and it's definitely not bright enough to pull focus on a sunny day outside. Speaking of pulling focus, here comes point number 5. I need to be able to reach my lens and quickly pull focus when running and gunning. So a 50mm rod setup that was just getting in the way of me pulling focus wasn't really my first intention. And the last point is it needs to be versatile. I need to quickly go and be able to throw the camera in my backpack or just put it on a gimbal, because these are the 2 setups that I like using the most. It's mostly shooting handheld, but then sometimes I just like to quickly throw it on a gimbal and get some smooth shots with it. Oh, and one last thing to note, I actually hate cables. So the fewer cables I can actually put on that rig, the better. The first setup is also the most simplistic, and that is the one that I was using in the beginning because my cage didn't arrive yet. I used a nadir rail from Small Rig that I had from another rig and attached it to the top of the camera. And on top of that nadir rail I attached a top handle from Small Rig as well. And I also added a cold shoe to the side of the top handle to accommodate for a shotgun microphone. And with the additional cold shoe on the top of the top handle, I can also make sure that I can easily attach a monitor on top of the setup. And the coolest thing about this setup is that I can quickly detach everything by just detaching the top handle from the nadir rail, and now I'm left with my bare camera. So everything, the monitor as well as the shotgun microphone and the top handle are all attached to one thing. So it's pretty quick and easy. I just need to unplug the cables and get rid of everything altogether. But this way I obviously had to use the internal Canon batteries, and I also didn't accommodate for any storage solutions. Also, the whole setup was a little unsafe. It was also just attached by one tiny screw on the top of the camera, and all the cables were also prone to be just ripped off easily as well. So my cage still hasn't arrived yet, but I was trying to find a solution for the battery life. So I tried to attach a Sony NPF battery to my camera. So what I did here is I built my own small 15mm rod base plate. And the way I did it is I used a Manfrotto quick release plate from Small Rig on which I attached two 15mm rod clamps. And to keep it as simple as possible, I used two 15mm 4-inch rods to attach to this rig. So I didn't want anything to stick out of the front, and I only needed a little bit of space to attach my NPF Sony battery plate on the rear end of the camera. So I used another Small Rig, a 50mm rod clamp, and attached a Tilta base battery plate to it. So the only thing I needed now was a cable to connect my battery plate to the camera itself. So now I found a solution for almost all of my problems, and I still kept it pretty simple. But what I didn't like about this setup was that my camera wasn't level on the bottom anymore. And the way I usually like to shoot is that I have my left hand on the bottom of my lens while wrecking focus and just grab the camera either on the side grip or on the top handle. And although there wasn't sticking anything out of the front, I could still feel the base plate getting in the way of me actually holding the lens, and it was really uncomfortable at times, especially when using shorter lenses. It also made the camera way higher, and the entire form factor was just a little bit unbalanced. The cool thing about this setup though was that with the quick release plate I could use just a Manfrotto 501 PL plate or just the base plate that I had from my Crane 3 and quickly switch between the crane, the battery pack or a regular tripod. So trying to accommodate for the camera not being level anymore on the bottom, I added longer rods, and that posed another problem. Because I either had the entire camera in my hand with the rails on top of my hand, but then my fingers wasn't really long enough to actually rack focus, and it just didn't feel right and it felt a little bit uncomfortable. Option number 2, trying to get my hand between the rail system and the lens also felt really uncomfortable, and another setup I just didn't like for myself. So now that my half cage finally arrived, I could try some other solutions. And why did I choose a half cage instead of a full cage? The majority of the time I like to use the side grip, and with a full cage it just gets in the way, and as I've already stated, my hands apparently aren't big enough to just grab around it, and I actually think that the side grip of the Blackmagic Pocket 6K is very nice and I can actually see myself using this a lot. So I didn't really want to put anything between this and the side grip, plus a half cage is also just a little bit simpler, smaller and lighter weight. So the first thing I attached to the half cage was a security clamp for all my cables, and that way you didn't really have to worry about damaging your HDMI port or just losing the connection to your external hard drive. This was also from Small Rig and I think it's vastly overpriced, but I haven't really found any better solutions, and whatever, safety first. So the next thing I did is I added an SSD mount for the camera. And for some reason I already had this lying around because one of our subscribers sent us some t-shirts a year ago and just put this one in the box. Honestly, I didn't even know what this was for about a year ago, and then when I started out rigging the Pocket 6K, I felt like, wait, I already have this. So this came in pretty handy. So now I had the top handle, I had the microphone, I had the external monitor, as well as a storage solution, but I still didn't really have a way to mount my battery. So I tried several different options. I tried different top handles that actually had an extension sticking out where I could actually put the battery, but this was really unbalanced and also didn't look quite funky, and I didn't really like that solution either. So what I did then is I tried to find a way to actually mount the NPF battery plate directly to the cage. And the solution I came up with is that I replaced the regular 1/4 inch screw that the battery plate from Tilta came with and replaced it with a screw that actually screwed onto something that I can put on top of my cold shoe. Unfortunately, I can't really link these parts anywhere because I just took an old ball header part that I had and it actually had the right parts, perfect for this kind of mounting solution. So now my battery plate actually sat nicely on top of my half cage and it didn't get in the way of the SSD mount either. Unfortunately, with the monitor that I've been using, it did get in the way of the HDMI cable when using a 960 or 970 mAh battery. With the smaller 550 ones it wasn't a problem, but as big as the 970 batteries are, it actually got in the way. I did however found an easy solution for that and just ordered a 90-degree angled HDMI cable, and now I have enough headroom to actually accommodate for the cable coming out of the monitor. So this right here is my favorite rig because it accommodates for everything that I was looking for. On top of the camera there's my top handle as well as the microphone and my monitor, and they're all attached to the top handle, which is attached to the NATO rail, so I can quickly get rid of it whenever I need to. And then I have my SSD as well as the NPF battery, which lasts me for a couple of hours. So whenever I want to throw the camera on a gimbal, I just get rid of the battery, leave the battery plate on, and I can just throw it on a gimbal now. And the Crane 3, for example, is way strong enough to accommodate for as well as the SSD, as well as the NPF plate that sits on top of the half cage. So here I can basically put a Manfrotto plate on the bottom of my camera and just leave it there. So whenever I want to put it on a shoulder rig or on a tripod or on a gimbal, I can easily do so, and the whole thing is unmounted pretty quickly. One thing to note is that I actually ended up getting rid of the SSD mount because I had some SD cards that were way fast enough to record everything up to 3.1 compression in RAW up to 25 frames, and I'm not shooting at this high of a bitrate anyway. The most I'm shooting with is probably 8:1 when shooting RAW, or mostly shooting 4K ProRes anyway. So adding the SSD just adds another bulk, weight, one thing that can break, and honestly I only have a 2TB T5 hard drive here that I can make better use for when I wanted to edit of it. I also tried some V-mount solutions, but honestly I don't see myself using this because I'm not shooting weddings or any all-day shooting where I need all that battery power, and two 970 NPF batteries are plenty for everything I do in a day. But if you are looking for a V-mount solution for your Blackmagic Pocket 6K, just use the 50mm rod base plate that I actually used because it's really handy with the quick release plate if you want to change between different setups and just want to throw the camera on a gimbal. And then you can just use longer rods and just attach the V-mount battery that way. And since rigging out a camera is always evolving and you change parts and you find better solutions over time, make sure to follow me on Instagram as well if you really want to get live updates, because whenever I find some neat tricks that I can add to my rig, I actually post them in my Instagram stories. So there you have it. I will link all the parts that I used in the description below, and I hope you liked my kind of rig because I haven't really seen that particular rig anywhere else yet. And let me know what are the things that you are looking for. Do you want a bigger rig than this, or is that actually a rig that you can see yourself shoot with as well? And if you want to see more content about the Blackmagic Pocket 6K or any other content we are going to upload in the near future, make sure to subscribe to our channel, hit the thumbs up button to help our channel grow, and I hope to see you on the next one.